I think it was Saturday night, maybe last Friday night, we decided to build a fire outside of our house. That's something we've always loved to do with our boys, but I just wanted to sit and talk with Melina, and that's a great place to do it. We had a burn pile seemed like our burn pile, we keep finding more and more stuff to put on it. So we lit our burn pile, sat there by the fire, and down at the bottom, to really get that fire going, I had a bunch of briars that I'd pulled up by hand, and I lit them first and piled the other stuff on top. And I walked over to the garage to get a chair, and I was on my way back, and as I was approaching that fire, it was snapping and popping really loud, and sparks were just going everywhere. You've seen a fire do that. I mean, it's a common sight, but I mean, it was really popping. It looked almost like fireworks. Pop, 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 pop. And a Bible verse came to mind. As sparks fly upward, so is a man born to trouble. And at the moment, I couldn't even think where that verse came from. I looked it up, and it's Job 5:7. I read it in a number of different versions. This is from, I believe, the New Living Translation. Read this with me, just as it is in the Scripture. Yet man is born to trouble, as surely as sparks fly upward. That's a poetic way of saying some things you can just expect. Some things just happen. Sparks don't fly or fall downward, they go upward. And just as sure as that is, it's true that we're born to trouble. Now, the good news is we're not born to trouble only. Y'all know I'm big on positive thinking. I don't think positive thinking is the answer to everything, but I do know this: negative thinking is sure not the answer to anything. And more good things are going to happen if you concentrate on the positive. But whether it's negative or positive or not, the truth is there's a certain amount of trouble in this world. And that's why in the book of 1 Peter, writing to a group of churches who were being persecuted, he said these words to them. He said, "Brothers and sisters, think it not strange concerning the fiery trial that has come upon you." I think I memorized that one years and years ago in the King James. Here it is in a more modern translation. Brothers and sisters, when various tribulations, temptations, trials come your way, don't act as though this is some weird, unusual, bizarre, rare phenomenon that happens just to you, because this is just part of life. And the happiest people in the world, the most victorious people in the world, are not the ones who manage to go through life dodging trouble because they're so quick. It's the people who just accept the fact that sometimes I'm going to get conked on the head. Sometimes I'm going to back in my car into somebody else's. Sometimes I'm going to get a speeding ticket. As sure as sparks fly upward, man is born in trouble. And so I want to talk to you about what to do with some of these troubles that come to us. Trouble, problems. Here's what I can say about this subject. Everybody in this room either has a problem, is a problem, or is married to a problem. And woe unto you if you got all three. It's the truth. But I want to give you a quote from Albert Einstein concerning our problems and what to do about them. One of the smartest men, perhaps the smartest man of the 20th century, here's what he said. We cannot solve our problems with the same level of thinking that created them. Let's leave that up there for at least a couple of minutes, Jeff. We cannot solve our problems with the same level of thinking that created them. Well, let me tell you a story as you ponder that thought right there. I read just this past week a story from the tales of King Arthur and his knights. And I read about two knights who met on a trail in the woods. And knights were known for being brave and honorable, and that meant a knight steps aside for no one. And the first knight said, "Give me the right of way," and the other said, "You give me the right of way. You stand aside." But the first knight said, "No, nay, but thou stand aside." And the man on the other side of the bridge lowered his lance, and he was already covered in armor, both of them were. I've always felt sorry for the poor horses that had to carry all that weight. Both of them already had their masks down. They charged and they ran together, boom, with such ferocity, such a smack that both the horses fell just from the shock of it. And both men staggered to their feet, pulled their swords, their shields, and they began to fight. You know, the thing I would hate most about having to be in a war or a battle during those medieval days, when you're fighting with swords and spears, dog, if nothing else, you're going to get your thumb cut off. You're going to get slashed on the wrist. But in most of those fights, I don't know if you have ever really paid much attention or given much thought to the knights and their contest. But what normally happened, unless one was just supremely more powerful than the other, when they began to fight, it lasted an hour or two. And they would both cut each other to pieces. And who won, that is, who survived, usually depended on who could withstand the most blood loss without passing out. And these two warriors fought almost to the death. And finally, that first knight that I told you who was standing where I'm standing, the one who made the initial challenge, he finally watched as his opponent fell down. You could tell he was still breathing. But he walked over with his sword, he himself staggering, bracing himself against a sapling. And he said, "Now, sir, before I cut your throat, I want to know who I'm addressing, who I have just defeated, who I have killed." And he pulled up the face mask, and it was the face of his own brother. A brother who had left home 3 or 4 years after he had. Both of them went to different parts of England, and this was their first meeting. Now, what was the level of thinking that created that problem? The level of thinking that created that problem was, I stand aside for no man. Nobody is going to get the best of me. I've got to always be the one in control. I've got to be the one who's right. I've got to be the one who demonstrates my superiority over others. I have to be the one who shows strength. That's the level of thinking that solved that problem. Well, that kind of thinking, if you use that kind of thinking for 1,000 years, if you operated like that every day of your life on that level of thinking, life is all about proving my own honor, proving my own status. That level of thinking is going to create a lot of problems. And guess what? As long as two people stay at that level of thinking, the problems will never be solved, and brothers will destroy one another. And husbands and wives will cut each other to pieces with their words. And co-workers will treat each other like trash. And neighbors will ruin the reputation of their other neighbors, all because of a very low level of thinking. What is it that can solve those kinds of problems created by this business of I've got to be on top? A higher level of thinking, that's the answer. The level of thinking that Jesus taught us to step up to. Come on up a little higher, where you can see things a little clearer. Now, when you think about those two brothers who practically killed each other, I've said enough about the level of thinking that created that problem. What's the level of thinking or the kind of thinking that can prevent those sort of problems? Resolve those sort of problems. It's the thinking of Jesus. Matthew chapter 5. Jesus said something that you've heard all your life, and you may believe that you cannot carry it out, but most likely, the reason you think you cannot live out some of the teachings of Jesus is that perhaps you don't understand what they really mean. Here's the verse I'm talking about. Jesus said, if your brother slap you on one cheek, turn and let him strike you on the other cheek also. Now, how many men especially, have you heard talk about that verse? Almost talk about it in a condescending way, as if that is some low, weak-minded way of thinking. Nobody's going to knock me around like that. Well, here's an important thing you got to understand. Jesus did not say, if one rears back and gives you a haymaker and breaks your jaw on one side, that you're supposed to turn and say, hey, this time see if you can break my nose. No. A slap of the face is like this. It's a backhand. Here's what I'm getting at. It's an insult. Insult. It was actually more of a challenge in itself. You want to fight? So Jesus said, picture this, if a man backhands you, and so your face goes this way, his hand is already over here, and it's ready to come back, and so turn so that he can catch you on the return. And what you've done is you've just shown him, I don't operate on that level of thinking. The level of thinking I described in those 2 nights. Stand aside for no man. Never swallow an insult. That level of thinking only leads to brothers killing brothers, family members destroying family members, Christian people in churches hurting one another. Jesus was saying, change your level of thinking. Change your way of thinking. Outgrow that for us what is basically a medieval way of thinking. And this is just one of many, many, many examples of how, as what creates the problem is usually wrong thinking. As long as you keep staying on that level of wrong thinking and you don't learn better ways of doing things, if you don't learn better ways to deal with people, if you don't learn more about yourself and come to let God help you understand more about yourself so that you know why certain things push your buttons, and you actually get to the point where the Holy Spirit clips and disconnects those buttons so that the buttons people used to push and make you mad, they can now push them all they want and it doesn't affect you. It's because that person is still on a low level of thinking and you've moved on up to something a little bit higher. Let me summarize it this way. Arguments, most of the time, I won't apply this to all arguments because there are some things in this world worth fighting over. There are a few. And there are a few things in this world worth arguing over, but not near so many as we seem to think. Not near so many. Most of the time, when you get right down to it, an argument is about me trying to prove that I'm right and you're wrong. And then, of course, you're doing the same thing. As long as we stay on that level of thinking, nothing will ever be resolved. That's why you got to keep growing. And that brings me to another quotation I want you to see. Jeff, this one is the one from C.G. Jung. The greatest and most important problems of life are all, in a certain sense, insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown. If you've got, let's talk about what that means in light of what we've discussed so far, the examples we've given so far. If you and your wife, or you and a family member, you and some other significant person in your life have been stuck, locked down in some unhealthy sort of relationship, a problematic relationship, you just can't seem to get past it. One day, one of you will try to be nice and think by being nice you're going to resolve it, but the other happens to be in a bad mood that day. And then on another day, they try to be nice, but it just so happens you're in the wrong mood. Those kind of things cannot be solved. Again, it goes back to that thing of, as long as you're down on that level, which is really all about the ego, me proving myself superior, that'll never be solved. That has to be outgrown. It has to be outgrown. If I heard someone say about 2 years ago, it was a statement that won't be on the board, but it grabbed me, and it's one that will grab some of you if this is the right time in life for you to grasp it. It said, it is almost impossible to have an argument with a spiritually mature person. Now, why would that be? It's almost impossible to have an argument with a spiritually mature person. Why is that? Well, have you been in an argument with a 4-year-old lately? And if so, what would you be arguing over? This is my toy. Now, as long as you're down on his level and you're the other 4-year-old, that's a problem. But when you're an adult, you've put away childish things. Now, you may discipline that child, and I hope you do. But you don't get down on his level and play tug of war. And in the same way, a spiritually mature person, like Jesus was, if somebody insulted him, if somebody slapped him on one cheek, he would turn the other to demonstrate, look, I don't play that game anymore. Why? You can play that if you want. Go to a beauty shop, go to a coffee shop, listen to what the people talk about. I've observed two major categories of discussions in places like that. Basically, anywhere that people gather when they have a day with nothing else to do, they obviously talk about the gossip. And that's what you're expecting me to say, and that's a sermon in itself. But the other thing they like to do is argue with each other about politics and religion, maybe even a bad call at a football game, whom the other dude on the other side of the table thought was a perfect call because it helped his team. What are they doing? They're arguing like little 4-year-olds. But you cannot lure a spiritually mature person into that kind of argument. Because in those kinds of arguments, it's really and truly all about proving the same thing those two knights were trying to prove. I'm superior. And the only real difference between a whole lot of arguments that take place in homes, in coffee shops, in cafeterias, in workplaces, the only real difference between a whole lot of those arguments and the fight those two brothers had in their armor was that one was a physical battle, whereas these are verbal battles. Now, I don't know. I'll have to say, if I had to choose between getting cut to pieces with someone's words and getting cut to pieces with their sword, I think I'd take the words. But then again, would that be a wise choice? Because wounds from a sword eventually heal as long as they don't kill you. And you can look and see the scar, but they'll naturally heal. But I bet you there are some words that were spoken to you by someone in an argument years ago that still hurt you. What's the answer to solving that problem? It's to recognize I'm not going to solve that problem. As long as I stay down on that level, the level where I was when we created it, the level I was living, the way I was thinking back when I let myself get into an argument over something that dumb. As long as I stay there, nothing gets better. You have to outgrow it. And when you outgrow it, once you've truly outgrown it, here's how you'll know. Somebody will push one of your buttons. One of those buttons that used to send you into hypolectic shock, and you went off. And nothing happens. Somebody says something to you that's like a slap in the face. And you just kind of smile. And in your mind, you turn the other cheek. Try that again. I don't fall for that anymore. That doesn't threaten me anymore. Why? Because I no longer feel that I have to show myself superior to you. Outgrowing. Now, I want to show you a solution. Something, this is from St. Francis of Assisi. This is part of a prayer. I heard it most recently at the funeral of Ken Hasty Sr. This is part of the prayer of St. Francis, who, by the way, was a knight who fought in the Crusades early in life and then underwent a conversion and became a Christian minister and a very holy man. And here you have the words of a man who had outgrown most of the problems that keep most of us wrapped up in anger and stress and tension. And here's his advice. Learn to live out this advice, and you'll find yourself not even being tempted to get into near so many arguments as you used to. God grant that I might seek first to understand rather than to be understood. Do you realize that is the exact opposite of the recipe for an argument? Because here's what we're trying to do in an argument. The goal in an argument is that I want to be understood. I want you to understand how right I am and what an imbecile you are. And as long as two people are on that level of thinking that created that kind of problem, it's not going to get solved. Somebody's got to come up a little higher. And this is the way you pray. Grant that I might seek first to understand rather than to be understood. I want you to think back to the last time you saw two people arguing, because it's sometimes easier to see in other people. And I'm not telling you to think about other people so we can get down on them. I'm just saying it's easier to see them in them. And once you see an unhealthy, sinful, self-righteous behavior in somebody else, once you see that, if you just go away thinking what a selfish, self-righteous person they are, you got nothing from it. But if you can walk away saying, hey, that was really pretty bad. Now, God, show me, where am I like that? Where am I like that? You pray that prayer, He'll show you. Here's the level of thinking that will solve most of your arguments. If your goal becomes, I want to understand your position. I'm not promising you I'm going to agree with your position. I'm not promising you that I'm going to concede and say you're right. I simply want to understand why you see this thing the way you see it. And you can count on this. If somebody else sees any issue differently from you, it's because something is either distorting your perspective of the truth, or something is distorting their perception of the truth, and often it's both. For example, if I'm an unforgiving person, and I'm talking to a person that I'm still mad with from an argument we had 3 months ago, then they can really do no right in my eyes. And anything they say, I'm going to interpret through that last bad experience I had with them. And I look at the situation, but I don't just see the situation. I'm bringing back that old situation and how much it hurts. And that messes up my understanding of reality. And often, again, that's happening with both people. And so the resolution comes when it's your goal to truly understand. Listen, and that means you're going to have to listen. Tell me why it is that you have a problem with my dog staying in the house here. Because it doesn't bother me at all. Having this dog in the house makes me feel loved and cared for. But it's driving you nuts. Explain to me, and I promise not to interrupt, what is it that bothers you about that? And you listen. And you will learn some things if you listen. And when you listen, you're going to find out that they probably have some legitimate reasons. And once you've listened, if you are big enough, if you're not like one of those knights who just has to say, stand aside, I yield to no one. If you truly listen, and if you will say, hey, I understand why you don't like that. And I understand why this bothers you. That makes good sense. Then they're in a position where they can say, okay, tell me how you see this or how you smell this. And you get to tell them. And what you're going to find out is that much of the time, not all, but much of the time, the people that you think you can't get along with, that seem like they're practically monsters, or at least werewolves, you're going to find out that they're a person just like you. They have their hurts, their fears, things they're insecure about, weaknesses they're trying to cover up. And when you can grow to a higher level of thinking, you will see a drastic reduction in the arguments in your life. And while it's true that the sparks will always fly upward, you will discover that just good old solid seasoned oak does not pop like fireworks. It's just the briars that do that. And you're getting rid of the briars.